Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Richard Prum here as a director of the Franke program in Science and the Humanities. And exciting to have you here for our first event of the new semester. We have another event coming up next week on Wednesday. Jared Diamond will be speaking in the Whitney Humanities Center on Wednesday, February 5 at 4 o'clock. And he will be talking about insights from individual crises for understanding national crises. So that's at the Whitney down on Wall Street here on campus. Today I'm excited to introduce David Haskell, our speaker this afternoon. David is professor of biology at Sewanee University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. He did his undergraduate degree at Oxford with W.D. Hamilton and Andrew Pomiankovsky, and went on to a PhD with David Winkler at Cornell University, where he worked on the evolution of begging calls in warblers, brilliant plumage, and predation at the nest, and other topics in behavioral ecology. After joining the faculty at Sewanee, he has continued his work on land use, bioacoustics, food production, sustainability in the Sewanee area, and has even gotten into family farming. I first met David as a graduate student at Cornell, where he was one of the less skeptical of the conversations I had that day when I was talking about sexual selection. This was back in the mid-'90s, maybe in early '90s. Since then we've stayed in touch somewhat distantly, as guys do, at meetings every once in a while, oh, hey, how's it going? But still aware of each other's work. And I remember most vividly a meeting not that many years ago, maybe 5 years ago at a bird meeting, where I was talking to David about my hoped-for direction in taking an aesthetic view of evolutionary biology. And most of the people I was talking to at the time in biology would respond with sort of, let's change the subject of the conversation quickly comment, and actually many of them still do. But not David. David was the first person who really took that statement seriously and recommended, you really ought to read some contemporary aesthetic philosophy. I think they're really getting into some interesting things. And it was with that inspiration, very soon after that conversation, that I first made my first dive into Sterling Library, foraging around on the shelves of aesthetic philosophy looking for inspiration. So he's had that impact on my own work, which has certainly become central to what I'm doing now. So the real reader in my family is my wife, Anne, and she has a voracious interest in fiction and nonfiction, consumes it at a rate that's sort of alarming from my perspective. I'm a slow reader, and there's never enough time to read all the stuff I want to read. So, but it's very frequent that, in the evening across the bed, I say, from her side of the pile, her side of the bed, you really ought to read this. And it was then that she recently proffered, or I guess it was last spring, this new little book, The Forest Unseen. And I must admit that I don't have enough time to read all the nonfiction and fiction that I'd like. And I have a particular impatience for a lot of popular science. I would admit I'm an opinionated guy, and it's hard to please me when somebody's cutting corners in their descriptions of the complexity of the natural world. And I cracked it open and I said, wait a minute, I know this guy. And then said, well, not only is the book cosmic, but the science is great. I think you'll like it. Right, and of course, her immediate comment before I could even think of it myself was, "You really ought to bring him in for the Franke program," right? And so that's the beginning of today's talk. I found his book to be a spectacular thing. I'll have him. He'll be describing it. The Forest Unseen, published by Viking Press last year, a sort of a new brand of contemplative biology and introspective. And cosmic and revelatory and solid, fantastic science. The book has been highly recognized. It's the 2013 Best Book Award of the National Academies of Science, winner of the 2013 Reed Environmental Writing Award, and the 2012 National Outdoor Book Award for Natural History Literature. Was a finalist for the 2013 Pulitzer Prize in Nonfiction. I'll read just one quote from Jim Gorman's review in the New York Times, describing the book as a welcome entry into the world of, or David as a welcome entry into the world of nature writers. He thinks like a biologist, writes like a poet, and gives the natural world the kind of open-minded attention one expects from a Zen monk rather than a hypothesis-driven scientist. Indeed, there are many images in the book that will stick with me forever. The idea of every plant cell, every freezing plant cell, treating water as carefully as a sword swallower, and the deer rumen as a luxury accommodation for bacteria and fungi. The book is filled with that, and it's really a delight to read. So I welcome David Haskell.
Thank you, Rick. Well, thank you, Rick, for that very kind introduction and for many years of fruitful conversations. And I'm glad I was able to contribute something, some little nuggets to your amazing endeavors, looking at the intersection between art and biology. And for any of you who have not read his which journal is it in? Biology Philosophy. Aesthetics, evolution, art, putting it all together, it's magnificent. So I'm looking forward to seeing that develop. And thank you to the Franke program in Science and the Humanities and the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies for your welcome, and particularly also to the Peabody Museum, the staff at the museum. I had a wonderful time this morning getting up close and personal with some of the ancestors. So some of the fossil collections there are really world-class, and it was a delight to be able to take a little time to look at those up close and to hear some of those stories. So it's a great honor to be here to share some of my work with you. Thank you for braving the edge of the Arctic vortex, the polar vortex, to be here in this beautiful space. I feel like I finally understand what it is to be a bark beetle, to be sort of inside the wood here, under the cambium layer, moving through. It's wonderful to be surrounded by so much beautiful wood, and to share some readings and some reflections that ultimately come from an experience not in the wood, but sitting on the edge, hearing those scratching sounds from the bark beetles coming from the inside. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience watching 1 square meter of forest in southeast Tennessee, on the mountain slopes of southeast Tennessee. The book is called The Forest Unseen. I'm going to share a few short readings, give some reflections, and try and put things into some context for you. Rather than just do readings or just do lecture, I'll mix it up a little bit, hopefully in a helpful way. So what did I do? I walked late one winter on a mountain slope. This is the, let me see if I can find a laser pointer here. No, I will point with my hominid pointer. So if you look at the bright green ridge coming down here, this is the western escarpment of the Cumberland Plateau in southeast Tennessee. Technically, this is the western edge of the Appalachian Mountains. The Smoky Mountains are further east, then there's a ridge and valley, and then you get up into the Cumberland Plateau, which extends from Alabama all the way up into Kentucky. Most of eastern Kentucky is up on the plateau. I'm seeing lights flickering here. I wandered through these woods, until I found a flat sandstone rock that looked like I could sit on it with a reasonable degree of comfort for a year. Thank you very much. Okay, we have free LASIK surgery for anyone in the audience who wants it. So my little square meter was just around this corner here. Here's the escarpment, sandstone, coming down to limestone at the bottom, and then rich agricultural land going out towards Nashville and Huntsville, if you're familiar with that region. So I sat down in an area I had not seen before. The square meter in front of that, about the size of a small dining room table, became my focus for observations over, at first, a full year, and now many, many years, as I've returned to this, just to sit, shut up for a change, and try and open my senses to see what was happening in this 1 square meter of forest. My rules Don't kill things, don't dig around too much, don't take things back to the lab, and just watch and use your senses, a notebook, a hand lens, some binoculars, and that's it. Now, I'm not opposed to taking things back to the lab, and I do that a lot in my scientific work and with teaching and so on. But for this particular project, I wanted to step into a different mode. The forest has, the forest is, you can see here in the fall, looking across onto the slope. Every tree here has a slightly different shape, slightly different color to it, texture. This is an indication of the very high richness of the flora of trees found here. So we've got some maple, probably that golden one in the middle there is a hickory, and so on. So mixed mesophytic forest, very high tree diversity, as you'd expect in the southern Appalachians. Down below, the deer haven't quite chewed it all down to nothing, although in some parts of our region the deer really have cleared out the understory, but we've got lots of dogwood, although the dogwood has been hit by a fungus lately. Spice bush. Further down, lots of ferns, very rich, particularly in the springtime, flora of herbaceous plants. This is where I was close to where I was sitting. My guiding metaphor for the project was the mandala. So this is a sand mandala, and you may have, I'm almost certain that these have been constructed at Yale here. Is that correct? I'm seeing some nodding. So the Tibetan monks, particularly in North America now, have made a little business of going around and constructing sand mandalas. And they do that to share their culture and also partly to fund their lives and to fund their monastic work. So this is about the same size as the square meter that I observed in the forest. It's created over many days by the monks letting tiny little colored grains of sand out of brass funnels, forming this incredibly intricate pattern across the table. This, of course, is an act of meditation. It's an act of training of the memory, because most of these patterns are created from memory. But ultimately, it is a recreation of the entire cosmos as understood within that tradition. Lotus flower, symbol of Buddha at the center, gates on the side representing different ways on the path to enlightenment. And so the whole world is seen through this small circle of sand. We've heard that in the Western tradition, of course. Julian of Norwich saw the whole universe. She was a Christian contemplative in a tiny hazelnut. Blake, seeing the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. So what I did was to take this challenge coming from particularly the religious traditions, the contemplative challenge, to sit down and pay attention and to draw the zone of attention in rather than trying to zoom around all over the world and look at the particularities. And within religious traditions, the claim is that paradoxically, you then see further by focusing in. A physical analogy is a pinhole camera. A pinhole camera only works if the hole in the front of the camera is a pinprick. It doesn't work if it's a big hole. So let's get more light in here, more focus, make the hole bigger. It doesn't work. It's got to be a pinhole. And so again, perhaps it's not quite so paradoxical in the physical realm. But by drawing in, you see more crisply and further. Excuse me. So here's a detail of these sand patterns. And of course, when this is finished, what happens to the sand mandala, the Tibetan mandala, it is swept up, and the jumbled sands are then cast out into running water. So it is also a symbol of impermanence. And these pictures in some way violate temporarily that impermanence. This mandala does not exist anymore. Its sands have been dispersed. However, on the longer time frame, of course, the pixels and the little electrical arrangements that are holding this on Flickr and on the flash drive here, that will all be gone too. And so this mandala is not permanent in any sense, even though it's been captured and is stored in the cloud here for just a little while. So as I said, I tried to apply this in an ecological context. I was not looking for religion going into the woods. I was trying to apply my senses to this world. And here is another sand mandala. This is just a few square inches of a sandstone block close to where I sat. There were probably a dozen species of lichen and moss on this one tiny patch here. And so in just a few square inches, you've got enormous, incredible history embedded in this. Each one of these creatures has its own history and story. Probably within the mosses, you've got all kinds of tardigrades and other animals clinging around in there. And these few inches, are also connected up to the rest of us through the rain that comes in, the mercury and the other things that are raining down onto this mandala through our industrial innovations. So the square meter, for me, served as a device to focus my attention, a way of structuring the narrative of the book, and hopefully it provided also an intriguing hook. When you're writing about something as seemingly diffuse and amorphous as biology, modern biology, humanity's relation to the world, it's helpful to have some way of organizing this and then something that people are going to hear the soundbite and think, that sounds crazy. I want to follow up on that. So this guy sat and watched 1 square meter. What's that all about? And so it also serves as a hook for the book that runs against the grain of the hypermobility and the globalization that, of course, we're all embedded now. And I think these two things feed each other. There's nothing wrong with mobility and globalization and if it's done right. But unless we know our homes, our places, we have nothing to offer that global conversation. So sitting down and paying attention to home, whether it's biological home or cultural home or the intersection among all of those things, I think is part of what this book is offering. So why did I undertake this project? First reason was I wanted to go to the forest without an agenda for a change. As a scientist and a teacher, I seldom did that. I go out in the woods a lot. But there's a lesson plan. Today we're going to talk about the carbon cycle, and we're going to take these measurements. Or today I'm collecting these snails because I need to get some mitochondrial information out of them, and so forth. There's a plan, an agenda, a lens, a preconceived idea of what I am going to encounter out there. And those are wonderful. It's a good thing for a scientist to have a hypothesis. It's a great thing for a teacher to have a lesson plan, usually. I wanted to be in a different mode, to leave those agendas behind and to just see where those observations might take me. Now, of course, we can never enter the world without preconceived ideas. We have ideas in our heads. We have emotional commitments. We have sensory filters that our physiology and also our memory and our training give us all. So I can't escape from those, but I wanted to step aside for the ones that I could, and then perhaps see the remaining ones more clearly. And we'll get to that theme here in just a moment. So this approach is rooted in my personal experience of meditation. I have a practice usually that I'm fairly good at sticking at, of just sitting down and being quiet for a couple of times a day and watching the breath. And in the practice of meditation, the idea of letting go of judgment and just being there for whatever arises without judgment, without clinging, or without pushing away, that's what meditation is all about. I'm applying that in some sense in a much easier context because I'm attending to the senses of this really amazing forest. So there's a lot of great stuff to be looking at and attending to. Whereas in silent meditation, with your eyes closed, it's all the garbage coming up in your head that you would rather not be aware of. But there is a strong parallel, and in fact, the practice of meditation was one of the inspirations for this book. So there were some personal reasons. There were also some professional reasons. After my watch, I wanted to tell some of those stories, to share what I had seen. So I would run to the library to read up a little bit more about what people had written and published on this particular organism or ecological interaction that I had observed. And then I wrote a series of essays to tell those stories in a way that I hoped would be interesting and compelling, and get the stories that are buried in scientific papers, in conference reports, in the backs of specialist brains. Get those things out there, hold them up and celebrate them in a way that I wish we had more of in our culture. You switch on the TV, you pick up the newspaper, even the highbrow newspapers, and most of it seems completely disconnected to what I'm really passionate about, which is twigs and salamander skin and things that are actually interesting and important and determine the future, right? So how does the carbon get drawn out from the atmosphere? Twigs. Those bud scale scars, measuring that, how far a twig grew each year by looking at its bud scale scars, that's the ledger of our future if we're looking at how much carbon is being drawn in. And then, of course, the exhalation of carbon back to the atmosphere is all through the particularities of the microbial community in the soil. So even those grand questions like climate change and global biogeochemical cycles are rooted in the particularities of things that I think we would do well as a culture to attend to a little more. And of course, these are familiar themes, right? We hear every week there's another survey that comes out that says, this country beats our young school children in math comprehension or in biology and so forth, and we're falling behind and so forth. Yes, science literacy and natural history literacy is an important issue, but for me, there's also an aesthetic component to this, because the Darwinian worldview, the ecological worldview, gives us a lens through which to see the world, and that lens explodes beauty. When you can look at a tree or a bird and see the ancient history and understand its relations to other species around it, your world is enriched compared to seeing it as just there are a bunch of trees, or that's just a bunch of birds out there. And that's often how they're portrayed, even in the more nature-oriented parts of the media. So connecting to stories of ecology and evolution can help, I hope, people connect into some of the incredible beauty and fascination and also pain in this world. With one comes the other. So let me start my discussion of the book with a problem that arises when we talk about other species or try to write about nature. A number of literary critics have argued that much nature writing falls into a dangerous trap. And that's the trap of believing that we can transparently represent nature as we're scribing on our pages. They claim, and I agree, that we can't write about an experience of being immersed in nature, because our thoughts about the experience are mediated through our idea of what nature is. And often that idea is that nature is a sublime place where we're going to experience some oneness or connection or relaxation or transcendence. And as a biologist, I agree with that, but I would extend the argument in two ways. One is we come with a lot of sensory and physiological filters that mean that even if our ideas aren't getting in the way, our sense organs are providing a particular window that we need to try to step out of. And the second thing is we can examine the origins of that lack of transparency, and those origins, of course, are evolutionary. So when we look at a tree through a hazy, distorting windows, and these windows are very clear, actually. The literary critics wouldn't like them. They're very clear. There's no distortion. There's not much mud on them. But if they were, why don't we look at the tree and the window and the mud on the window and those little ripples in the old poured glass there? And so that's my solution, is address this head on, say, yes, you're right, let's look at both of these things, and not make the mistake of saying, well, we can't write about trees because it's all just about our idea of tree. Well, no, I believe there is another being out there that we need to attend to, however hazily and imperfectly. So let me share a short reading from a chapter, and I'm going to jump to different parts of this chapter so that we're not here for several hours, just 2 or 3. And when I try and do this, so to discuss another creature, to discuss the impossibility of actually knowing that other creature, and to do it in a way that people might find worth reading. And that last part is the hardest. January 21st, the experiment. A polar wind rips across the mandala, streaming through my scarf, pushing an ache into my jaw. Not counting the wind chill, it's 20 degrees below freezing. In these southern forests, such cold is unusual. Typical southern winters cycle between thaws and mild freezes, with deep chills arriving for a few days each year. Today's cold will take the mandala's life to its physiological limits. I want to experience the cold as the forest's animals do, without the protection of clothes. On a whim, no reenactment here. On a whim, I throw my gloves and hat on the frozen ground. The scarf follows. Quickly, I strip off my insulated overalls, shirt, t-shirt, trousers. The first 2 seconds of the experiment are surprisingly refreshing. A pleasant coolness after the stuffy clothes. Then the wind blasts away the illusion, and my head is fogged with pain. The heat streaming out of my body scorches my skin. A chorus of Carolina chickadees provides the accompaniment to this absurd striptease. The birds dance through the trees like sparks from a fire, careening through twigs. They rest no more than a second on any surface, then shoot away. The contrast on this cold day between the chickadees' liveliness and my physiological incompetence seems to defy nature's rules. Small animals should be less able to cope with the cold than their larger cousins. Small animals cool rapidly because they have proportionally lots more body surface than body volume. And so that launches us into discussion of biogeography and why animals tend to be larger at the higher latitudes and so forth. Then, the wind gusts hard, and the burning sensation in my skin surges. Then a deeper pain starts. Something behind my conscious mind is trapped and alarmed. My body is failing after just a minute in this winter chill. Yet I weigh 10,000 times more than a chickadee. Surely these birds should be extinguished in seconds. So there's me, there's the chickadee. This makes no sense whatsoever. Great introduction to a little lesson in ornithology here about shivering those huge, great big pectoralis muscles. We have no muscle that's equivalent. They shiver that, they get a blast of heat through their bodies. Their eyesight, as Rick can tell us now, in 4 dimensions with a great model, they see colors we don't see, and they see combinations of colors we don't see. They have visual acuity that is much higher than us. So where we see a twig, they see this flaking, amazing contortion with little spider eggs and hidden insect cocoons. So they can find food in a forest. They live in a different sensory universe than ours, in a different forest in some ways. So yes, they can find food where there is none for us. As I stand shaking, fear surfaces. I panic and dress as fast as I can. My hands are numb. I grasp my clothes with difficulty, fumbling with zippers and buttons. My head aches as if my blood pressure had suddenly soared. My only desire is to move quickly. I walk, jump, wave my arms. My brain signals, make heat, fast. The experiment lasted only a minute. Just 1/10,000th of the duration of this week of Arctic air, yet my physiology reels. My head pounds, lungs can't grasp enough air, and my limbs seem paralyzed. Had the experiment continued minutes longer, my core body temperature would have dropped into hypothermia. Stripped of my clever cultural adaptations to the cold, I'm revealed as a tropical ape, profoundly out of place in the winter forest. The chickadees' insouciant mastery of this place is humbling. And the chickadees, of course, also have it rough, because a lot of them won't make it. They've mastered it, but many won't make it, and so these cold winter nights are where the chop comes down into the chickadee population, which then means that come summertime, there's a superabundance of insects in these northern forests, and that powers a migration up from the tropics. And so from these particular things like chickadee physiology and not being able to make it through in the winter and populations being kept pretty low, we have global level phenomena like bird migration emerging from that. So we discuss torpor and other phenomena and conclude with my own physiological inadequacy in the cold. Has its origins in natural selection. I'm out of place at the icy Mandala because my ancestors have dodged selection for cold hardiness. Humans evolved from apes that lived for tens of millions of years in tropical Africa. Keeping cool was a much bigger challenge than keeping warm. So we have few bodily defenses against extreme cold. When my ancestors left Africa for northern Europe, they brought with them fire and clothes, carrying the tropics to the temperate and polar regions. This cleverness produced less suffering and fewer deaths, unquestionably good outcomes. But comfort sidestepped natural selection. We are condemned by our skill with fire and cloth to be forever out of place in the winter world. So what happens with a reflection on chickadees, the forest becomes a mirror, and we see ourselves a little more clearly, our limitations, and we also see the ways that we're held in this tension, if you like, between being able to relate to the chickadee, a blood cousin in the vertebrate clan, and also the utter distance between us and them. It's unimaginable. I can perhaps imagine what it's like to have one extra color receptor. I can't imagine what it's like when all those color receptors in my eyes interact, produce a subjective experience of seeing a twig in the way that chickadee would. And that's an important thing, I think, to hold up in so-called nature writing, is that, yes, we have these emotional and intellectual reactions to the world, but there is a limit there to how much we can, how far our imaginative capacity, can carry us into understanding these other creatures. So it's not just other species we learn about, it's ourselves. And this is where first-person narrative, taking our clothes off in the woods and sort of try to explain what that's all about, and scientific knowledge can merge. And I think that is a place where often nature writing, science communication works. So my watch in the forest also quickly brought into focus other limitations of our ideas about nature. From the very first day, I saw that the forest was ruled by the inconspicuous proletariat, the 99% of biology. We're the 1%, the big lumbering creatures. Lichens, tiny worms, fungal strands, the microbial community. And the many unseen physiological and physical processes that determine how plants and animals and fungi, microbial communities are going to be structured and how they're going to play out through time, like the difference between the vascular system of hickories and maples, explaining that patchy variegation on the mountainside in the springtime, where one tree emerges a month before the other. The hygroscopic spittle of ticks that they drool down onto their chins and thereby drink water out of the air as they're waiting for the vertebrate to come by and get them. Out of these seeming minutiae, the whole wild world is woven. Too many W's there, maybe. And that's what this book is partly about, is taking up those humble little creatures, holding them up and gazing at them, even the ticks, eye to eye. And of course, out there in the main cultural depictions of ecology, we have polar bears eating seals and redwood trees standing majestic but inert. That's a small part of biology, and those trees are in fact not inert. They're living creatures continually, dynamically involved with their surroundings. So of course, getting beyond this distorted view of the community of life can help us become more ecologically literate. It can also, and this is perhaps a little less obvious, the focus on the large, cute mammals often has a hidden message, and that is that nature is not here. Nature is somewhere else, usually the other side of the world in a nature reserve. It's not here. So it reinforces this view of us and them, nature and humanity, rather than what we know from a biological point of view is that that division is an illusion, a falsehood. So even the word environment from the French environ, the environment, the surroundings, the other than me, that doesn't make sense anymore. Everything we know about human physiology now and the world suggests that the environment truly does not exist, at least in the way that it's, at least in the etymology that has come to us now. So I tried to give many examples in this book and hold up and celebrate these fascinating creatures. Our noses as microbial detectors, the biology of grazing snails and how that interacts with bird breeding and acid rain. I'm going to share just one short reading here, appropriate to the day perhaps, and that is about winter plants. And Rick has already mentioned one of the little metaphors in here. And what I'm trying to do here is first to help people see what mostly we walk by and not even see, and then perhaps second to feel some curiosity or maybe even some wonder about it. So we're in January still. The life-filled exuberance of the birds contrasts with the mandala's plants. Their gray branches and bare twigs offer a scene of desolation. Death juts from the snow, fallen, partly decayed maple branches, and frayed stubs of leaf cup stems protrude, each stem ringed with a circle of sublimated snow that reveals the dark litter below. Winter appears to have delivered a thorough defeat. Yet, life persists. Bare shrubs and trees are not the skeletons they appear to be. Every twig and trunk is wrapped in living tissue, unlike birds that survive by fighting the cold, with food won from winter's tight fist. Plants somehow endure without recreating an internal summertime. The bird's survival is astonishing, but the plant's resurrection after a full surrender is so far removed from human experience that it edges into scandal. The dead, especially the frozen dead, should not return. But return they do. Plants survive in the same way that a sword swallower survives, with careful preparation and meticulous attention to sharp edges. Plant physiology can generally cope with mere chilling. Unlike the chemical reactions that sustain humans, plant biochemistry can run at many different temperatures, and it does not fail when cooled. But when cooling turns to freezing, problems start. Expanding ice crystals will puncture, tear, and destroy the delicate inner architecture of cells. Plants in winter must therefore swallow tens of thousands of blades, keeping each one away from their fragile hearts. Plants start their preparations several weeks ahead of the first freezes. They move DNA and other delicate structures to the centers of their cells, then wrap them in cushioning. The cells get fattier, and the chemical bonds in these fats change shape to make them fluid in cold temperatures. The membranes around cells become leaky and flexible. The transformed cells are padded and limber, able to absorb ice's violence without harm. And there follow a couple more pages of reveling in plant physiology. And we conclude the impression of desolation in the mandala is superficial. Within the bounds of this 1 square meter are hundreds of thousands of plant cells, each one wrapped into itself, intensified in its withdrawal. The quiet gray exterior of plants, like gunpowder, belies the energy that is latent here. So although titmice and other birds give a vigorous display of life in January, they are trifles compared to the power stored in the quiescent plants. When spring sparks the mandala, the energy released will carry the whole forest, birds included, through another year. So a preacher of twigs is what I'm trying to become here. And I hope as you're wandering the streets of New Haven, you'll look at the twigs and think of all those many, many ice blades. And particularly in spring, when that emergence comes out, we can understand it, but on another level we cannot, because it's so far out of the bounds of human experience. Another theme in the book is the power and the ubiquity of biological networks. And I'll introduce this and do a short reading for this, and then give some reflections on this. This came about sitting in the woods on my rock in the fall. So I had a practice of sitting, melting into the rock, and just being still for hours on end. And when you do that, and those of you who've had this experience, you know that the other creatures forget that you're there. You become a rock, or at least many of the creatures do. And then things start having birds walk across your feet, the chipmunks come and check you out, and so forth. So I'm sitting very still, and a white-tailed deer walks up to me and comes really close before she realizes, takes alarm, gives her alarm snort, and bounds away through the woods, coming across a seated human in the woods in the fall in Tennessee. Not a good outcome for a deer. People have a vigorous love of venison. So she took alarm, ran away, and that's not remarkable, right? Deer everywhere these days, and we often hear their alarm snorts. Although some are so tame that they don't even bother snorting, they just try and shoo you out of their world. But because I'd been sitting there quietly, I could hear how the rest of the woods responded. That alarm call was like a rock thrown into a lake, and the waves spread out from there. So the chipmunks immediately, chip, 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 they pick up the alarm. The chipmunks further out pick up the alarm, the ones further out. And a wave of chickadee alarm calls spreads out through the woods. The gray squirrels in the trees do the same thing. They start alarm calling, alarm, alarm. Whoopa, whoopa, the wood thrush further down the slope gives its alarm and spreads out. So there is an acoustic network in the woods that we are mostly unplugged from, but the organisms in the wood, particularly the mammals and the birds, are attuned to this. They know what is happening 500 meters away because they can hear the news wire, the rippling coming through literally the tweetmosphere, the original tweetmosphere. And so they're plugged into the social network, and for them, if they miss the status update, they're not just out of it, they're dead. The sharp-shinned hawk came, you weren't paying attention to the alarm calls that we've been giving over here, you're the sharp-shinned hawk's lunch or dinner time snack. And now, of course, hunters and other people who've been to the woods, and many cultures have done this for hundreds, if not thousands of years, have tuned into these sounds. We have the ability to tune back in just by paying attention to that acoustic network. And so now when I'm in the woods, I know when people are coming down the hiking trail further down the mountain, because 2 or 3 minutes before the humans arrive, the chipmunks start up with their particular alarm call. A bow wave has preceded the arrival of the people. And the people usually arriving in agitation and talking loudly as they're hiking, which is our nature as primates. Those of you who've been to places with wild primate cousins know that usually they're not quiet. They're up there gossiping and cussing each other and throwing fruit around and so on. So we come from a not very stealthy lineage. So I have some sympathy for some of my colleagues get really annoyed when the students are just being too loud in the woods. And I sympathize. It's good to get a practice of slowing down and being quiet. But partly that's what it's like. You know, you're an 18-year-old primate. What are you going to do when you're a bunch of other 18-year-olds, some of whom you really are very interested in? You're going to be loud and you're going to be joking and so on. And so that's what the chipmunks are paying attention to. And of course, we are predatory organisms, so they want to know what we're up to. So there's an acoustic network, and of course that then leads into a description of the other kinds of networks in the forest. I'll read 3 paragraphs here about a plant network. And this book was written a few years ago, and so now those of you who are plant physiologists will now know that this has been, what I write about here has been expanded many-fold, and we now know even more amazing ways in which plants are networked through airborne chemicals. The animal's acoustic network has an invisible analog among the forest's plants. When insects chew on leaves, they trigger a physiological reaction from the host plant that not only deters further damage to the host, but also alerts neighboring plants. Damaged leaves turn on genes that produce a flush of chemicals. Some of these defensive chemicals evaporate and perfume the air around wounded plants. The wet interior of neighboring plants' leaves are soaked in these molecules, and like aroma in a human nose, the molecules dissolve and move into the surrounding cells. Here, the chemicals turn on some of the same genes that produce the defensive chemicals in the original plant. Unwounded plants around a damaged colleague therefore become less palatable to insects. The trees are listening. And when I sit or walk in the forest, I'm not a subject observing objects. I enter the mandala and am caught up in webs of communication, networks of relationships, whether or not I am aware of it. I change these webs by alarming a deer, startling a chipmunk, or stepping on a living leaf. Dissociated observation is not possible in the mandala. The webs change me also. Every inhalation carries hundreds of airborne molecules into my body. These molecules are the aroma of the woods, the combined fragrance of thousands of creatures. Some aromas are so pleasing to us that we've domesticated them, extracting perfumes. At least one such perfume, jasminate, is an alarm chemical, signaling danger among plants. But these perfumes are the exception. Most of the forest molecules bypass my sense of smell and dissolve directly into my blood, entering my body and mind below the level of consciousness. The effects of our chemical interpenetration with plant aromas are largely unstudied. We haven't stooped to take seriously the possibility that the forest, or the lack of it, might be part of our being. Yet forest lovers know very well that trees affect our minds. The Japanese have named this knowledge and turned it into a practice, Shinrin-yoku, or bathing in forest air. It seems that participation in the mandala's community of information may bring us a measure of well-being at the wet chemical core of ourselves. So when I leave Yale, I will not carry just memories, I will carry physical bonds to Yale, to the trees, to this building. I will carry this auditorium bound into my bloodstream, for better or worse. Lead platinum, so whatever is outgassing out of here is probably not doing me too much harm here, and I'll enjoy the buzz from the carpet. So it's what we're reduced to now, carpet huffing. So this gets to what I think is a theme in biology that is starting to explode, but we haven't quite figured out what it means. And that is realizing that the self is an illusion. And what really matters is the network, is the relationships and the connections among what we formerly would have referred to as selves. Now, every day there's some new study about the human microbiome coming out, that it makes us happy or sad or sick or fat or thin. Those studies certainly are going to be superseded as we learn more, but the key message is that I'm not a self, I'm a walking community. And the texture of my feelings and of my mind emerge from the interactions of multiple different evolutionary lineages gathered up into this temporary bundle that I would presume to call me. And so that most private place, our consciousness, is a product of a network, is a product of an ecological community. So the self, in that sense, doesn't work anymore. The self as a gene doesn't work anymore. A gene isn't a gene. A gene is part of a community of interactions with proteins and other bits of nucleic acid. And to understand that gene, you have to understand that network. It's not, so the old view, sort of one gene, one enzyme, and we're done, doesn't hold up anymore. Trees, of course, so seemingly separate with their separate trunks, wired through the Ethernet below ground in their mycorrhizae, but also above ground through sharing chemicals and information. their leaves are loaded with endophytes. So an oak leaf is not an oak leaf. It's a community of different kinds of cells that we summarize by calling it an oak leaf, but there's a whole ecological community in there. Even the thing that sits at the core of biology. What is biology? The study of life. What is life? Self-replicating organisms. The self. It's right there. And yet the models of the early evolution of life now are talking about networks. It's not a molecule that self-replicates to make another molecule. It's molecule A brings molecule B into being, brings molecule C into being, recreates molecule A. It's the network that replicates itself and competes with other networks that seems to be, the current model says, how life may have gotten started at the very origins of that replicating process. So the self we have to leave behind and move on to thinking about networks. And I think we're going to need some help in doing this because biologists are not good at thinking out of the atomistic view where you have separate individuals that jostle around. Those jostling interactions of atoms determine natural selection, ecology. And that's the fundamental way in which natural selection is usually defined. Separate individuals interact, and then you get an evolutionary process emerging from that. Physicists, on the other hand, have had for many years to talk about light, wave, particle, both, depends on the situation. Now a forest is also in a wave-particle situation. It's a collection of individuals, and it's a network to contradictory, mutually incompatible views that are both true at the same time or both true in different contexts. And I would also say that we need to listen to the religious traditions, not to get converted to their metaphysical worldviews, but because these traditions are places where humans, very smart humans, have been thinking for thousands of years about the self and the community and the network. In Confucianism, you're defined not by yourself, but by your relation to others. In Buddhism, the notion of the self as an illusion is a foundational part of that religion. Even in Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, where there is an atomistic view of the soul in some respects, at the heart of Christianity, the Trinity, 3 in 1, 1 in 3, it's just like a biochemical network. So I'm not sure my theologian colleagues are going to want to hear that. But I do think that there are some languages, ways of thinking that could be helpful here, not because we've got to buy into the supernatural claims of this group or that group, but because these are other really smart people who've struggled with this and could perhaps save biology a lot of work as we move into this leaving behind the atomistic world and moving into the networked world. We're also ready to do this, I think, because of what's in our pockets, right, our phones. So in the 70s and 80s, I had little computers, and the computer was the computer. It was the atomistic world. Now, my phone is almost irrelevant. What's relevant and can be monetized and spied on is the network of connections that I've formed and what's being sent up into the cloud. So we understand networks and how fundamentally different they are now because they've come into our lives. But those things in our pockets are really echoes of the 3.5 billion-year-old network that we're part of. And so to me, that's a very interesting place for further conversations among those disciplines. Let me conclude with a few short reflections about the roots of this book. And those roots are natural history, the study of the particularities of our homes. Now, natural historians ramble all over the world, but often their passion is based on attention to home. And as we know, in the academy as in the culture, natural history has not been faring so well lately. In fact, many of the courses and programs that have been offered in this, and many universities are being gotten rid of. So what is the value of natural history education and enthusiasm for natural history? I would say that two classes of benefits. One are practical benefits. We can't help but need to manage and conserve the world. And if we're going to be stage directors, we need to know the script and the players. If we were going to put on Midsummer Night's Dream here, we'd need to know who Puck and Oberon were. Now we're going out into this management situation where we know the big ideas, we've never heard of Puck, and we wouldn't be able to identify Puck if Puck came and sat right in front of us. Puck is a character in Midsummer Night's Dream. And the details of this, of course, matter. If we don't get those details wrong, the more global models, the universal models, which are important, will fail. Knowledge of natural history, I think, also has some political implications for the current debate about human sexuality. At the Supreme Court, the argument was made against gay marriage was that we need a marriage founded in nature. The Tennessee legislature put forward legislation saying you cannot teach kids in school anything except natural reproduction. Those arguments are completely uninformed by any knowledge of what the trees are doing out there or the snails, let alone the biology and the behavior of our closest cousins. Now, biology is not going to tell us in an unambiguous way, this is how you should behave as an individual, as a society around sexuality for humans. But what biology can do and natural history can do is falsify some of the arguments that are still being vigorously made in the highest court of the land about the nature of sexuality in the world. And so some attention to the spring blooms of the cherries along the mall in Washington, D.C., and the sex-changing slipper limpets just down the Potomac would do us all some good, I think. So there are practical benefits, and they're important. I also think that paying attention to the ecological particularities of home has value that transcends practical utility. If we take Darwin seriously, those trees, those chickadees, those fungi, they're our kin, they're our blood relations. And the rocks are also our kin not in a biological sense, but in a sense of coming out of the same stars and physical processes. So we belong in this world. And just like coming home for Thanksgiving, getting to know the family might have some inherent value. Now, in biology, some of the family is going to try and kill you, the parasites and so forth, but still, there may be value in leaning into that. I'd say beyond Thanksgiving dinners and enriching lives by knowing communities and family members, I'd say natural history offers a challenge to the academy. Mobility, and I'm a great example of this, mobility is the name of the game in academia, right? You go to high school one place, undergrad another, grad school here, postdoc, first job, second job, all over. For me, 2 continents, 3 different countries. So the questions you ask have to be unrooted. You have to be able to put them in the U-Haul and move across the country with them. And that's okay. There are great questions that are unrooted questions. But what it does is that those questions that are rooted don't work anymore, because that's not going to work for your career. So what gets counted as knowledge has changed within the academy. So for our ancestors, local knowledge was the important knowledge because it was related directly to survival. Now local knowledge is considered, that's what you do when you become dead wood or you've run out of real good ideas and so forth. And we see this now being pushed down to the lower levels through these next generation science standards, which I think have a lot of great things in them. But you will find no encouragement to know the biodiversity of home in those next generation science standards that our school kids will be living with now for many years. Rather, you'll find encouragement to evaluate competing design solutions for developing, managing, and utilizing energy and mineral resources based on cost-benefit ratios. Evaluate or refine technological solutions that reduce the impacts of human activities on natural systems. Those are both great activities. But if we have an educational system that explicitly mentions geoengineering the planet and extracting mineral resources to impose costs on someone else as a fundamental part of education, but has no encouragement to know the local stories of home, the ecological stories of home, or the nature of biodiversity around home or globally, I think we will have an impoverished education, and the fruits of that are unlikely to be sweet fruits. Therefore, natural history's challenge to the academy is, can the particularities of place, of home, matter? And this isn't an argument for narrow provincialism. The universal questions are important. Those great ideas that Darwin had, but where did they come from? They came from the particularity of beetles and bird specimens. And so my argument is that this focusing in on 1 square meter or on one beetle, through that particularity, you can get to the universal. The two feed each other. And what we've done in education is focus mostly on one end and lopped off the other. So I conclude by inviting you to consider how you might conduct your own experiment, either for yourself or with your family or students, to construct your own pinhole camera, to commit to giving repeated attention to a tree, a patch of sky, a community of squirrels in a suburban yard. Find your mandala, find your place, and watch it for years. Enter into relationship with that one space, that one place, and see where it takes you. And as T.S. Eliot wrote, be still and wait. And I think I will close there, and thank you for your attention.